My name is Marc Cudlik. I'm coming to you from Vienna, and I have the honor to present my master's thesis, actually. I graduated in November from the Science and Technology department. Glad that the previous presentation mentioned Bruno Latour, the material turn, and digital, and like Actinetric Theory and stuff, because that was exactly the theoretical approach I took in my thesis. And I looked at a very peculiar topic in the realm of cybersecurity, and that's software vulnerabilities, actually. So going into the micro of sociology, away from the bigger analysis of risk and economics and politics and stuff like that, down to the very small topic of software vulnerability disclosure. Next slide, please. So that people know where this is located, it's somewhere in between the Science and Technology Studies, which is a small field in the sociology department, concerning themselves with the analysis between technology and society and how the one brings forth the other and the other way around. Critical security studies, because software vulnerabilities, of course, are in the realm of cybersecurity, and this is quite a new topic actually in sociology as well as in political science in general, and just an emerging topic in academia, which is somewhat interesting. And interesting enough, political ecology also took some theories from sociology or the other way around and developed their own field and their own perspective of materials having agency and how they form the world and stuff like that. So, next slide. Material turn and digital materiality is somewhat strange and ephemeral take to have in terms of how to conceive software vulnerabilities, because they are neither completely material in the sense they are part of microelectronics and of platine, chips and stuff like that, and in the realm of electronics, but on the other way they are quite in the realm of sociology and logics and mathematics, because the software is of course code-based and therefore deep in the realm of logics and logical chains you have to command and program. So as the previous presentation already mentioned, Bruno Latour, Reassembling the Social, we have it here again. So it comes from the late 80s to the early 90s, where the start of Actinetric Theory is more or less, depending on thought, history of science and stuff like that, so that goes way further. But the thing is, Actinetric Theory or microsociology turns around the idea that there are those big ideas like economics or political interests or parties or like political realism in international relations, that there are those big entities really forming the world, but turns it on the head and really looks at the small interactions between people, between things, between instances where the social really gets connected on the smallest possible level. And Latour argues that the social, so the notion of social economics, social sciences, never explained anything and has to be explained by itself as well. So social doesn't say anything without referring to something very specific and open up a network of other things. So you have to turn it around and really explain from the get-go why people have these specific interests, where we come to material interests and logics they impose or imaginaries they have, and just like why people identify a certain way and why they act a certain way. So that also goes back to technologies and devices themselves as being an active and constitutive part of the social world, in terms of everything you touch, every new smartphone that comes out gets to be a status symbol, and every app you use is rooted in a material basis as well. So therefore we can say that materiality is not defined by one ontological state, but it gets to be an analytical category for the social in and of itself. Next slide, please. That brings us to Actinetric Theory as the theoretical lens, which, as I said, macro-sociology in the realm of science technology studies. It's this bottom-up process, this turning on the head the social structures. And I made some name dropping just so you people may look it up if you are interested. Thank you very much. That was that. Vulnerabilities. I'm not sure how much of an idea you have in terms of IT. Therefore, you have some definitions here. I will point you towards the very social constructivist or social categories that are imposed on those definitions, like the behavior of a product that violates an implicit security policy. So it's not something that really can be defined as that is that and that was it, but it is really like it points towards the constructedness of software vulnerabilities as an entity of its own as well. So here we can see the starting points of this Actinetric theory. The same goes with a weakness in the computational logic. I mean, yeah, thank you very much. I think that was that for that. Why are they relevant for contemporary world? They are the building blocks. Software vulnerabilities are the technical building blocks for viruses, worms, ransomware, for all the bad things you can do with a computer in general, or not only a computer, but we are talking about the Internet of Things and industry control systems. Yeah, so they are ubiquitous, so they are everywhere, as you all know, because everybody has a smartphone in their hands right now. Maybe you have, they also, all of those things, the malware and the ransomware, the damages go in the billions of dollars for the world economy, since going back a long time, so I don't even know when the first computer wars and viruses were. I think they followed shortly after the internet and connected devices and connected computers, so like accessing databases without having the credentials to do so and stuff like that. I here also pointed out some attacks on critical infrastructure, which you may have heard, the centrifuges in Iran, the very famous Stuxnet virus, which really like hindered their development in terms of a nuclear bomb, allegedly. Then the electrical grid in Ukraine, long before the current war, so Ukraine is said to be one of the training areas for Russian state-sponsored hacker groups, although attribution in the realm of cybersecurity is quite difficult, but the electric grid got turned on and off by remote control access coming from allegedly Russian state-sponsored hackers. Gas pipeline in the US, you may have heard of it, the Colonial Pipeline hack, which was a ransomware attack, which I think they were down for like some weeks or something, and you can imagine if a gas pipeline is down in the middle of the US, that also hampers like access to heating, access to cooking, also like affects gas prices in the economy market and is generally just a bad thing. The same goes with hospitals in the UK, where the National Health Service, the NHS, got hit by also a ransomware attack, whereas their just like hospital servers and computers went down, got locked, and so nobody could like write down diagnosis and the whole just I lost the full words here, but the whole service just was shut down, which also like had consequences for the people there. Thank you very much. As I said, code and software vulnerabilities are ubiquitous. There are three main vectors which I identified. The first one being the code base itself. So one product, one app you've got installed on your smartphone is comprised of sometimes millions of lines of code, sometimes just a few thousand lines of code, but not one person wrote that code base, but they put libraries from GitHub, open source, or like other programmers from their company wrote on that. So like it is a very fragmented thing, a code base, and a very put together one. So there are very different logics also applied, because every programmer has their own language in a way, and you can discern themselves. So it is a very fragmented thing, and there are many avenues what can go wrong with that. The next thing would be the density, so the question of how many vulnerabilities are in one line of code. There are only estimations because nobody knows, because all the time there get found new vulnerabilities and new avenues on how to just do different stuff than the code is intended to do, actually, while inserting other numbers, while inserting other codes into a field of where you can enter your password or whatever, your credentials. So yeah, the question of how dense they are, how many are there, and of course the amount of connected devices. They are estimated to be 46 billion devices in 2021, and there are estimations going up into the some 120 billion devices in 2030. We're talking everything from the home computer to industry control systems to sensory networks in water supply chains to everything that has an IP address. So you have to imagine that everything, if one of those things has a vulnerability, you can take that to the power of 1 point something billion. So next. That means to get rid of those software vulnerabilities, you have to have a network in place to either catch them before they go live, before they put into the real world in live systems. That is a possible way to find them and to remedy them. That would be done by pen testers in-house testing, or by quality control and quality assurance processes. But the thing I took a look at was coordinated vulnerability disclosure, which is a process that goes like this standard structure I took here, like going from the finder to a finder finds a vulnerability in a live system that is out there just because they do it by hobby, just because they get paid for it, just because they stumble upon it. So there are many different routes that can take how you can find a software vulnerability. Then they report it to the company responsible to then patch it. So that would be the standard or the most the most reduced format that can take. Next sheet, please. So there is a difference between bug bounty programs and coordinated vulnerability disclosure. The first thing you search for software vulnerability resolvement would be bug bounty programs, but those are like programs whereas companies who have software in their devices say like, hey, this is your attack surface, please test it, please search for stuff, and if you find it, we give you money or we give you fame in those Hall of Fames, and the company therefore invites hackers to find software vulnerabilities. The thing I took a look at was the vulnerability disclosure, which doesn't have this structured approach, but was more on the side of just finding them in the wild and really, report it to the companies they think they're responsible, or to the organizations they think are responsible for that. Which brings us, next sheet please, to my research questions, which guided my research, and that would be how do software vulnerabilities inform the formation of social structures. So like in this very small process of coordinated vulnerability disclosure, where can I find like those big societal constructs, such as the market, such as a company, such as an IT department, like all these instances which are represented in this process, but has to be carved out, and really are the building blocks, which are broken down into what elements constitute software vulnerability research, so what is needed to do software vulnerability research in terms of knowledge, in terms of intentions, in terms of in terms of how you can recognize that this could be a software vulnerability. Then how are software vulnerabilities assembled in the process of reporting them to the vendors. This is interestingly interesting because those software vulnerabilities, they sometimes get thrown back to the finders. So somebody who finds a vulnerability says, hey, you have a problem in your software, and the company decides, no, that's a feature, and that has to be like that, and the researcher possibly says like, okay, but this is a problem and an actual IT risk and a security risk for the program itself. So there has to be decisions made in this process, and there are also categories in terms of how critical this vulnerability may be, so how distributed, in how many products it is present, how many downstream vendors there are in terms of like, okay, a subsequent product also has this problem because software, the product uses a software that comes from a different place. And the third research question, or this third sub-question, how this process then informs the emergence of societal structures. Seems like it's a little bit of reformation of the main question, but it's then this process really linking back to the main research question from the process itself to the social structures as well, so it has something of a feedback loop in there. Next sheet, please. My methodology was classical desktop research in terms of document analysis, really reading from policy documents to standards to best practice reports to academic papers and security-related documents, just a ton, and I can really just encourage you to do the same. So my pinnacle was when I got a new document and I understood all the references that document made, so that I knew, okay, I've read that, I've read that, I've read that. If that is a good research in my mind, so I can really encourage you, if you have that close of an understanding, that you really get the references without looking them up, then that's good for you. The second approach was qualitative interviews with experts in that field that is comprised of the people searching for vulnerabilities in the wild. I found them mostly in the Hall of Fame, so I mentioned before. So there sometimes are people saying, hey, I'm a Whitehead hacker, I'm a security researcher, please contact me if you have questions. They really put their name out there. So they are quite open about what kind of work they do, and therefore, yeah, quite easy to find actually. Other than you may think about hackers because it's this hooded guy in the cellar and like hacking away everything. So no, they're people, regular people. The other approach was like people in the companies that have a public program, where a point of contact where they invite people to send them security flaws they found in their software, and these are part of the IT department, the management position of which would be called Chief Information Security Officer, so I contacted those. Next sheet, please. Yeah, this is the timeline. I took this coordinated vulnerability process, this disclosure process, as a red thread in terms of finding those bigger social structures, because you start somewhere, because otherwise you get lost in your own cloud of topics you want to discuss. So I took this standard timeline, so okay, what starting from the finder, then reporting process, then examining an analysis process within the company, then feedback to the finder, and then potential feedback loops in the company itself, so that the software vulnerabilities then can be patched, can get rolled out, and the vulnerability can be just resolved. That's all. So it's going from the finding process to the really big management and economics and decision-making processes and the politics behind it. Yeah, so that was my red thread within the thesis. Thank you very much. Going back to the Actinetric Theory and the theoretical lens, my findings were that the coordinated vulnerability disclosure process, while coding the interviews and really going into the details of how they are processing those reports, contain a lot of simplifications in terms of, I mentioned the examining scores and to discern what is a vulnerability and what not. In terms of ANT, there are a lot of transformation processes and reconfiguration processes going on. In that sense, I defined the coordinated vulnerability disclosure process as an obligatory passage point, whereas everything that should be considered a vulnerability has to go through. That's not necessarily the only obligatory passage point there may be. As I mentioned in the bug bounty programs, the companies invite hackers to really test their systems, and that could also be considered an obligatory passage point when a vulnerability or where a vulnerability becomes a vulnerability in its own right. Thank you very much. My conclusions. They are talked in a very mundane thing. So like the researchers as well as like the people in the IT departments just said like, yeah, I mean, this is an everyday occurrence. Code bases are faulty. No coder is perfect. There is no perfect code. So it's just like whatever. Why do we even talk about that stuff? But if you go into the details and the potential risks of that stuff, you can see, as I mentioned, like the billions of damages and like what critical infrastructure can be really affected by vulnerabilities, by such a mundane thing. So therefore, like the vulnerabilities become a matter of concern, the terminology of vulnerable tool. The thing about it, formation. The thing is, the ontological multiplicity, as it is so nicely called in Actinetric Theory, the whole framings, what a vulnerability can be and what functions it can take in society, are quite broad. As you can see, there is from being knowledge in terms of like what people know, how to recognize that could be a vulnerability. You have to have experience in finding them. You have to have experience or knowledge about how software works in general. They can be a weapon, of course, as I said, like the pipeline, for example, ransomware is a weapon. They can be a commodity. They can be bought and sold. This knowledge can be bought and sold, just like intellectual property, if you want it or if you want to look at it that way. There can be a point of pride. I found a very big vulnerability, which they can be a token of exchange between companies. I tell you, I have a vulnerability in that system and I know you use similar software, so therefore, please tell me if you have a problem so that we can talk about it, and really our IT departments can work closely, even if we are maybe as companies in what is the word? If they compete in the same marketplace, so that's the word, competition. Then a token of professionalism, of course, you can put it in your CV that you found a vulnerability, a liability for the companies against the customers, so like, oh my god, your product is faulty, so please, I won't buy your stuff anymore. The reason for companies to establish new departments and teams in terms of if you put a point of contact out there where you invite researchers to say like, hey, if we have software vulnerabilities, please write them to us. You have to monitor this process. You have to have people who have an idea about software. You have to have yeah, just like a feedback loop into your product line or into the rollout processes. So you have to have management decisions to make, because all of these things cost money in our economy. So therefore, yeah. But the last thing is also maybe relevant. They going from being just matters of concern, being a problem, being a risk in society, to being a matter of care, which is a terminology brought into being by Puy de la Bella Casa. I'm sorry about the pronunciation. My Spanish, Portuguese, is not that great, but look her up. Great book. In terms of technology, something you have to tend to, because otherwise it falls apart. Like think about railroad networks or something. You have to have like time put in, money put in, people educated to care for those things. So there is also this societal perspective going back to technology, not only technology being a risk for society, but also society tending and caring for technology to keep it up and to really get rid of these risks. So you have this classical science technology notion of the one contributing, changing the other. Next. Some tips in research, I will go over that in terms of time. Just quickly, however precise you think your research question is, it isn't. Break it down further and further, because you come from the smallest part to the 100th to the 1000th thing ever, and you take one document and go to the references, go to those references, and it explodes in your face. So the more precise your research question is, the better you have a guiding thing for your thesis, and or not only thesis, but your paper, or whatever you write. The more ideas you have about one specific thing, keep to that you have a red thread. Start early with like just putting down some notes. It doesn't depend if you are drunk after 5 beers in a pub, or if you're clear in your mind in a seminar room, hopefully. In terms of security research, think about security. Think about your operational security, think about data security. Especially in COVID times, it was quite a hustle to really think about, okay, how can I talk to people in security without risking their security, because it's funny going to Zoom and talking about IT security on Zoom. So yeah, think about it. Do you want to use encrypted email? Which software do you want to use? In that regard, give your interview partners choices and alternatives, and think about it and make it a problem, make it an issue, so that you can show them, hey, I thought about it, and what is your ideas? Should we meet? Do we have to meet? What is how do you feel comfortable in us doing research together? Aim higher than you need, which was quite a thing. I didn't thought that would work, so just go like, just write managers, write people you wouldn't think that would respond whatsoever. So like, it's not the people, mostly themselves, that answer those emails. And but on the other hand, they can help you. They can distribute your request to the relevant parties. So like, it really helped to just go and write an email to the chief technology officer of a company and say, okay, I would like to do research. Can you help me? They are quite responsive to that, especially if it's in their own self-interest as well. Use your personal connections, that's clear. Ask friends of friends, ask parents of friends, ask, I don't know, everyone. Just be bold in your research. Aim higher than you think. That also helped. I didn't think that would work out in the way it did, but it got me 2.5 job interviews and 1 possible PhD position. Just because I did a good master's thesis. I wasn't that good of a student in terms of like, homework and stuff like that. Yeah, but good luck. And yeah, next thing, some sources. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Next, and yeah, thank you very much.
We will now take questions from the audience, including the online audience, of course.
Yeah. So, how do you see if we accept that future will be more and more, if society will be more and more digitalized in future, can you maybe further elaborate on this view that these vulnerabilities will have societal impact on digitalized society in future?
There are a lot of discussions going on in terms of how is it a good idea to put everything online. I just had the sheet there in terms of like e-health and e-government, and everybody wants to put everything on the blockchain and on their web services and everything, so that's just going to be a problem more and more. There are a lot of discussions on the other side going on from the security community, from IT departments, from hacker communities, from just interested persons in terms of how to make that secure. And there are a lot of different avenues on how you can do that in terms of just like cyber literacy, so IT literacy for people, not clicking everything you see and every link you get, but really checking the extensions possibly so you don't open a .exe document on your computer, but also in terms of like, okay, discussions regarding trust, like data centers, who is the owner of these servers where you put your data on, who is serving you that information, where we come back to like disinformation campaigns and like, sorry, not now that. And yeah, so there is a lot going on. In terms of vulnerabilities in particular, there are a lot of debates going on in terms of what is called safe harbor laws. That is, hackers are allowed to hack as long as they don't do any harm. So if you find a vulnerability, you just go as far as to have proof that you could access X, Y, Z, that you could shut down X, Y, Z, that you could do that and that. But at this point you stop and you report it, and everything else is in the hands of the whoever is responsible, be they organizations, states, be they companies.
Yeah.
So yeah, vulnerability in that regard. And on the other hand, the bug bounty programs get more important every year. So there are more people interested in being hackers, being security researchers. There are a lot of more companies recognizing the threat coming from the cyber realm and really wanting to protect themselves. So also there is a lot of money going into security research in general. I mean, I have to fear, honestly, that the pace of which we digitalize our world is much faster than the security that comes with it. So I fear that there will be bigger issues and bigger issues until possibly a point where, yeah, it's a little bit fatalistic in a way, but I don't see that happening. So
My question. Okay. I really agree with you on all the topics that you covered, and how our world is just, our technology is really expansive very fast, and it's coming to like normal people who don't know much about it, and they need to use it in their jobs for their communication, but they don't know the risks that they pose. Also, they just, I mean, we as a collective accept that there are some companies that steal our data, like Google, Zoom, millions of others, like Facebook, Instagram. People spend 8 hours of their day on their phone, and they're just like getting their data sold off to those companies. So like, it should be best that we decentralize internet, and that just people educate themselves as much as they can, both in formal education, and then we need to talk more about this, like this talk, but we need more like media coverage of these things, and to talk more about it in public, and yeah, so I
definitely. I mean, in terms of, I didn't necessarily talk about data protection and stuff like that in general, because in that regard it is a different kind of vulnerability if you want to. So I really talk, in my research I concentrated on stuff that can break things. So really like, okay, what do you do if like your telephone lines, your water supply, and your electric grid is down at the same time. Things that can break on that level. But you are completely right about data protection stuff, and everybody thinks that their VPN can protect them online, but nobody is, or I didn't read that many things about how VPNs actually work, virtual private networks, and there are, on YouTube you can find tons of sponsored content in regards to that, but nobody knows the technical background of that and really doesn't give a shit about it, to be honest. But yeah, we come back to education and just literacy. How to do that? I'm not quite sure, but I hope that the younger generations may just by being on the interwebs all the time, possibly learn or go that path down as well, and possibly stumble upon like the issues that come with digitalization.
Yeah, I just want to reflect, like when you said that security never like touches the expansion of some innovation, maybe like some kind of hope, like it's always almost was like that. There was always some kind of expansion, then there was a problem, vulnerability, then they see how to patch it in a sense. So it's funny to see this cat and mice game. Like we have these white hackers who are trying to be good guys and exploit and report, and on the other side there are the criminals. Yeah. But regarding what you said about blockchain, I'm quite like in recent time I'm researching about that. So I understand that there are a lot of vulnerabilities there, but in a sense, especially smart contracts, let's say, but in a sense of Bitcoin, isn't that the more secure way of securing the network than having centralized entity which can make mutations in the data, which can be hacked from one point of a node versus for example, having 51% attack of all the nodes, which is practically quite impossible. So
I mean, sure, there are use cases whereas blockchain would be definitely
in proof of work, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, so like smart contracts would be something which I would consider possibly more secure than just normal contracts. But even in blockchain technology, there are problems. If you think about splitting blockchains, there is manipulation in there. But also the introduction of the technology in and of itself, as is configured right now, it's the two properties traded most in blockchain is right now NFTs in terms of like NFTs as land mass, if you want to.
Oh yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
And the second thing is currency. But if you say, hey, it's a secure currency, but on the other hand, everybody can see your transactions. Is it really secure? You know, like there are some privacy concerns then. So it has like a rat's tail that in terms of security in and of itself, not necessarily vulnerability, and in particular not technical, possibly. I mean, I bet there are people cracking blockchains as well. So like I have no doubt about that. But there are other vulnerabilities coming to society from the introduction of new technologies and privacy. I mean, yeah, if you pay for Bitcoin with your credit card, is it really private then?
No,
So
yeah, it's definitely not. There's even one side of blockchain community which somehow said that Bitcoin went like in a bad direction. Right, what you were saying, because they went in this legalized, like social sphere, take them into the transparency realm, let's say. It's not anonymous anymore, and there's even like this thing that some Bitcoin will become filthy because of these recent transactions.
of course,
Yeah. So yeah, there are a lot of problems, but I'm interested in just technology part of it. The real practical implications can go either way. It can be even worse. We can imagine some authoritarian scenario. Yeah.
And I mean, just on like electric requirements, so like really energy costs and energy power levels that this technology needs. How much can the planet sustain? I mean, we had this graphic coming this meme, as it was called, I suppose, like this caricature. Climate change is coming, and therefore how much blockchain can the planet sustainable have if we don't have sustainable energy supplies? So, I mean, just as a further problem of like blockchain technology in general. So it definitely has some use cases. I haven't seen that many good use cases. That is possibly my point. Could be that the technology is in its infancy phase right now or something.
Yeah, definitely. But they say there is like at least 10 years more.
But with that also the risks, like technical security risks are coming because you will find vulnerabilities if they don't exist right now, or you don't know, or we don't know that they exist, but possible people with higher technical knowledge than us already found them but didn't disclose them, for example. So the non-disclosure part didn't cover it all because that is a big issue. Should you, when should you, why should you?
Yeah, and there's a big problem with political regulation because they don't, like in terms of smart contracts, they don't know whom to blame in a sense if code is faulty. So in a sense, okay, we trust code in smart contract, we don't trust third party, like legislation or something, but who is then to blame? Is it the coder?
Exactly, enforcement gets really difficult. Sorry, we can talk later if you want to. Are there any questions? Possible? Other questions?
So I'll pose a question.
Sure.
I'm actually interested because you mentioned that there are, of course, security experts, and on the other side, there are white hat hackers who basically do the same job from the opposite side. I was in the sense that they report the vulnerabilities that they find, and they, well, let's call it a profession. That is either their hobby or their profession. I'm actually interested in whether in your interviews you have come across whether you have asked them about their motivation for doing the job they do, and whether you found some difference between them in that sense.
A little bit. Most of them made a moral argument. So like they disclose vulnerabilities because it makes the internet safer for all. Like the vulnerabilities that they disclose in products and in services, they have users that have no idea that they exist. You know, they saw themselves as somewhat of the experts in that regard, and they are. So they found the vulnerability, and they wanted to make sure that the company or the services or the products don't harm the users who have no idea about it. Some made that argument, but others just said like, okay, I'm interested in the technical side of things, so not necessarily moral implications whatsoever, or political implications, which was quite interesting. So they just said like, hey, I like looking at code, I like breaking things, I like understanding how things work, and yeah. I dedicated a whole chapter in my thesis about the intentions of those people, because there is also sometimes a financial reward, not only from the companies, whereas they invite people, so the bug bounties, but also if you just report vulnerabilities that are so critical that the company says like, okay, if we don't fix that, we're definitely fucked. Here you have money. They really just make a living out of it, so there is a financial implication to that as well, which is quite interesting, because one could say that the companies, if they have like this front-facing or like this outside-facing email address and point of contact, they outsource security, you know, they make it private, so like they just deploy systems and technology and then say like, okay, if you found a vulnerability, please contact us or something. So like there is this market thing as well in terms of privatization, so it's not the company's responsibility as long as it is not found. So like, yeah. So that's also just interesting. So there are quite a variety of intentions on why people do vulnerability research. Some just do it, and sometimes people, there is this term, this interesting term called biped hackers. So like they have a security job at a IT company as a day job, and in the night they just, you know, rob banks or something. So like this duality, where is the moral boundary in that regard? So that's quite interesting as well, because the individuals, there are, yeah, where can you really draw moral boundaries in that realm? And it's very, very difficult to say what is good, what is not good, because especially if we come to the national security realm. I mean, if you work for the NSA or something, you have these weapons in your, you have cyber weapons, you know. They got robbed some years back by a group called Shadow Brokers, if you want to look them up in this history, because it's just like, it's just a thriller. So if you read the Wikipedia article about it and understand half of the words, I highly suggest to read it, because you have this national security implication that you want to crack terrorists or assume terrorists' computers, to get into them, to have this information, or to hack signal, just, you know, in regards to preventing terror or something. But on the other hand, you also have the flip side of the coin, is that you make everybody who uses that just for the normal communication with their grandma or something also less secure, because you, yeah, so if you work for one of those companies, do you disclose the vulnerability then, or and avoid your access to that, or not? So it's a little blurry, and it's really difficult to talk about morals in an absolute sense in that realm, so, as is everywhere, I suppose.
We have a little more time, so we have a short final question.
Maybe I could say something because of the time. I had something on my mind when we were discussing the vulnerability of software. So to me it seems like software which we use on the internet daily, whether it's the social media or the emails or stuff like that, was very vulnerable like 10 years ago. I remember when I was in primary school, hacking, I mean the so-called hacking of emails, Facebook accounts and stuff like that was fairly simple. You know, all you had to do was guess a certain security question, you could enter anybody's email. And you know, people who've been doing it and they call themselves hackers, you know, it's not actual hacking, but these vulnerabilities were very frequent and they were very hard to counter by somebody who wants to secure his account. You really had to, you know, make a really secure password or put an insane security question. Otherwise, somebody he really wanted to could hypothetically get into his account, which was at the time kind of normative, because people, they didn't clean from these accounts maybe as much as we do today. Because back in the days, you know, we had our email and maybe we played some games, maybe we had our Facebook with 20 friends we had there. It wasn't, we weren't as engaged in this software content as we are today. So I believe that the vulnerabilities back then were very frequent, but the consequences of exposing these vulnerabilities were not as dangerous as they could be today, because today somebody has all of his information on his email, on his accounts. You know, all of our private and professional information can be found on our data online. Our credit card information in various places, everything we bought, everything we used online. So, I mean, I believe like the vulnerability has decreased, but the consequences of hypothetically
decreased or increased?
Decreased. I believe the vulnerabilities have sorry.
It went up or it went down?
I believe they went down. I believe the systems we use have been made way more secure than they were in the past. Okay. I mean, for instance, if we just look at the ways we have to log into our emails today, I mean, even if I log in from a different computer, I have to do a few steps which weren't required before. For instance, if I try to log in on my email from this computer, it will ask me for security code that is sent to my phone. I mean, in the past, it wouldn't do any of that. So security has been increased. You know, these hypothetical vulnerabilities maybe were decreased. So, I mean, of course, this is just an idea which I put in front of everybody for challenge. It just appears to me that way. So, I mean, I would like to hear your comment on that. Do you think that vulnerability, I mean, do you think the systems over time became way more secure than they were in the past? My vision is that they kind of did, and that the main element which contributed to that is the fact that there is more capital in these systems now. You know, they're worth way more money. Facebook could lose way more money if somebody gets hacked than they would, I mean, maybe lose 10 years ago. So yeah, I wouldn't like to expand this topic too much, but I would like to hear your comment on this.
I think for the small instances where it's about entering your private data, it possibly got more secure with or in theory at least, in terms of like two-factor authentication, so like that you put a password in there and then you get sent a code and you have to enter that code as well and stuff like that. But in terms of how the internet is built, I think it got bigger just because of the software that gets used in comparison to like 20 years ago or something. Just the amount of programs that are out there and which sometimes share like, this is the upstream and downstream problem, you know. There is this cool vulnerability called log4shell, which is a Java exploit. And Java is probably one of the most deployed software libraries out there. So like, it's a fundamental of so many other programs that are then built upon that. And if you have a problem down there, then every program that uses that library is fucked. So it's an exponential problem, I think. So in terms of what you can do about very specific instances in terms of hardening your usage, then it's possibly more secure. But on the other side, with that comes a problem. You need your email address in every program. How many email addresses do you really use? You know, you have that one main which you use for like 20 accounts, I suppose. One for Counter-Strike and Steam, one for, I don't know, possibly your work email address as well, one for your Tinder profile, one for your, I don't know, wherever you are. So like, you have this single point of failure, you know? So if that gets cracked in some way, whatever, then you are fucked on 20 accounts as well above that. So you have this problem of like building things upon things, and if the lower thing then gets compromised, then you have the problem of like a chain, a blockchain. No. So do you understand? So I'm not quite sure. This one thing gets possibly more secure because of two-factor authentication, but if it gets cracked, then you have a really big problem. So yeah, I mean, yeah, and like the databases that we are building in terms of like Equifax, the credit scoring company that got breached some time ago in the US, compromised 1 in 2 Americans. Congratulations. So like, we are building databases in the European Union with our fingerprints in them, with biometrics, which are huge databases which get shared across borders, which have a lot of different institutes and institutions like police departments and I guess, yeah, just like intelligence agencies and stuff like that, just like sharing those information and having access there, so you have that problem as well. So like, who has access to your information? So I'm not sure. I think it at least holds the balance in terms of how secure you can make stuff, but if you don't have any technological knowledge, you wouldn't use two-factor authentication, you know? So if you just have a Facebook profile, I don't think many people use their two-factor authentication for their Facebook profile. I certainly didn't. So, yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I see. Thank you for the answer.
Okay. So as far as time goes, unfortunately we have run out of it. So I would like to, at any rate, I would like to thank our lecturer for the lecture.
Thank you very much. So yeah, if you have any other questions, come find me. I'll be around, and also in the next few days.
So this is for you, just the presentation is supposed to be.
Oh, yeah, a goodie.
Oh, yeah,
desktop.